What would you do if the entire town turned its back on you? If your very existence was deemed a sin, and the punishment was carried out publicly in the shadow of the chapel? Clara Gray did not scream. She did not beg. She did something far more dangerous. She remained silent. And that silence, stronger than 1,000 prayers, echoed all the way to the desert, summoning a man whose destiny was not to rescue her, but to stand beside her and show the world the true strength of a soul that refuses to break. The leather strap hissed through the parched air before it fell. The first strike left a crimson blossom on the white cotton. The second carved a line of fire into her flesh, but Clara made no sound. Her bare solace pressed into the sun-scorched earth outside the chapel, where she was tied to the hitching post like a sacrificial animal. Her head was bowed, not in shame, but as a veil for the embers that still smoldered in her gaze, refusing to be quenched. The preacher, his face flush with righteousness, swung the leather belt as if each strike were a prayer, each welt a testament to his piety. The townspeople stood frozen, their gazes fixed, drinking in her shame like parched travelers at a poisoned well. They had once whispered about her, about the way she commanded the forge with bare hands, about the unbending pride in her posture. And then, as her belly began to swell, the whispers had turned to judgment. She carried a life without a wedding, and she wore no mask of remorse. That was her true sin. As the preacher's arm rose a 7th time, ready to deliver another lesson. In damnation, the thick air suddenly fractured. A new kind of stillness, sharp and heavy, cut through the old silence of the crowd. A figure detached itself from the heat shimmer at the end of the road. He wore no badge, no sign that he belonged. He walked through the crowd not with force, but with an indifference that rendered them insubstantial. His steps were even and sure on the earth that had witnessed her humiliation. The preacher hesitated. Clara lifted her head, a smear of dried blood on her lip, her eyes locking onto the stranger. It was not a plea, but a primal recognition. He stepped onto the chapel grounds, his calloused hands finding the tight bindings. He began to undo them, a silent, methodical unraveling of their judgment. When her arms fell free, Clara's strength gave out. She collapsed, but he was there, a bulwark against the ground. He gathered her into his arms with a familiarity that defied logic. Still, not a single word was spoken. He simply draped her ruined back with the heavy canvas of his duster, shielding her from their eyes, and stood tall, a solid, unmoving presence between her and the town. His stride never faltered. He carried her past the last silent houses of the town, to a cabin forgotten by time, leaning against the twilight. He didn't need to find a key. A gentle push of his shoulder opened the groaning door, revealing a space steeped in shadows and the smell of decaying wood. He laid her on the only cot, its thin mattress groaning in weak protest. He did not light a lamp. He broke the seal on his own canteen, the cool, precious water trickling onto a clean cloth. He washed away the dust and dried blood from her back. His touch was firm, yet his hands held the reverence of one mending something sacred that had been broken. Clara drifted on an ocean of pain, before slowly surfacing into consciousness. She awoke in a heavy darkness, enveloped by a scent that was not her own, a fragrance of dry earth, worn leather, and the clean, wild scent of desert rain. His heavy coat was draped over her. He sat there, a motionless shadow leaning against the doorframe, his hat pulled low, obscuring most of his face. A single word clawed its way from her raw throat. "Why?" The fragile sound hung in the thick silence. He did not answer. Instead, his hand disappeared into his coat pocket and emerged with a length of scarred leather, etched with the marks of time. He placed it on the small table beside the cot. The faint moonlight that crept through a crack in the roof was enough for her to recognize it. She knew its weight without touching it. The ghost of her father's handprint seemed to linger on it. It burned with everything else, she breathed. The words barely whispers. His other hand produced a folded, fragile square of paper. He slid it across the floorboards toward her. Under Clara's trembling fingers, the paper unfolded, revealing two figures drawn in soot-black charcoal. A tall man was laughing, his laughter still alive in the strokes, and on his shoulders sat a little girl with tangled hair. It was her dot in the bottom corner, two initials, almost faded. Clara's mind raced, connecting the name to a woman who lived on the edge of memory, a woman who took in strays. Miriam Grafton, and this was her boy. "You were there," she murmured, a statement of fact, not a question. "You saw us." The man did not nod, nor did he shake his head. He didn't need to. He hadn't come to save her from shame, but to return a memory that only he had kept safe. The space between them was now filled, not with words, but with the weight of a shared history, of a kindness carried across a desert of years. The new day's light met her on the cabin's threshold. She didn't flinch. Behind her, his form detached itself from the shadows of the doorway, a silent echo to her every step. The town had anticipated a ghost, a woman broken into whispers, and flight. They were not prepared for the solid, unwavering line of her back as she walked down the main road. Her path cut straight to the heart of her old life, the cold, silent smithy. The grating of the rusted key in the lock was the first. Words spoken. Her hands, familiar with soot and coal, coaxed a spark into a flicker, then fed it. Soon, the furnace heart of the building roared back to life, hungry and defiant. Consuming the darkness that had lingered for too long inside Doc. By noon, they began to appear, not to help, not to speak, just to watch. The banker's son, the boy, with clean hands and empty promises, froze mid-stride across the street. His face became a mask of bleached linen. Clara offered him nothing, not even the honor of her scorn. He was just a hollow echo, and she was no longer listening. What stunned him, and the rest of the town, was not just her. It was the second hammer that began to fall. He stood opposite her at the anvil, the sleeves of his shirt rolled back to reveal forearms mapped with pale, silent histories. Their hammers rose and fell in a shared cadence, a conversation conducted in steel and fire, as if they had learned the rhythm from the same ancestral flame. A child, drawn by the fire, shyly approached with a coin in his hand. Clara took it and gave the boy a freshly cooled horseshoe, its surface marked with a single five-pointed star, an echo of her father's mark, now reborn in her hand. Her eyes softened for a moment. They built a language in the space between words. A mug of coffee placed closer to his left hand was an answer. A question about his past was met with 3 quiet taps on the table, a pause, then 2 more. A story told in rhythm and silence, which only she could decipher. One evening, she noted the way his left hand favored his knife. "You were faster with that one, weren't you?" she asked. He didn't startle. His left hand simply rose, fingers curling into a phantom grip before resting again, the motion as eloquent as a confession. He didn't heed to speak of the trap that had crushed his right wrist. She had already seen the story in the silence of his other hand, and she needed nothing more. A knock echoed against the doorframe, too formal, too crisp for this edge of town. It was the sound of order intruding on a world that had made its own peace. Clara wiped a smear of soot from her hands as the cowboy stood before her, his hand resting lightly on the knife at his back. The door opened to reveal Reverend Alder. The man was scrubbed clean of the righteous fury he'd worn in the town square. His collar was a rigid white line of authority. "I have come to speak," he declared. Clara stepped forward, her voice as flat as the surface of a lake before a storm. To speak or to ask for forgiveness? The Reverend's gaze swept past her into the dark corners of the forge. "The rumors," he said, "of your defiance are unsettling the good people of this town. Is that so?" Clara replied, her voice cool. "I wonder why. Pride is a sin, Miss Gray." Her voice was as sharp as steel quenched in cold water. "And cowardice is a plague, an illness I have stopped inheriting." She could feel him right behind her, a silent mountain. His presence was an answer that needed no question. The Reverend sighed, taking a step back. He left without a blessing, without an apology. But as the door closed, a faint smile touched Clara's lips, because for the first time she had not needed his permission to speak. Her eyes met his. He simply raised an eyebrow. He walked to the hearth and with iron tongs pulled a glowing coal from the fire. He pressed it to a fresh bar of iron, and the metal hissed, submitting. He was not forging a name or a symbol of punishment, but a shape of freedom. The whispers about her changed. Her name no longer tasted of shame, but of iron and smoke. Men in town tipped their hats as she passed, not out of courtesy, but because they did not wish to meet her gaze. One afternoon, the shrill voice of the banker's niece cut across the porch opposite them, loud enough for all to hear. He risked his good name for her, and she walks around as if she deserved it. Clara turned slowly, her gaze cutting straight through the woman. "He didn't give me anything I didn't already own," she said, her voice even and clear. "He just made it visible." Silence fell over the porch. That night, as they sat on the swing she had rebuilt herself, he placed a small, cloth-wrapped object in her palm. She unwrapped it slowly. It was a metal ring, forged from a rusted nail that had been bent and shaped by patient fire. It was not perfect. It was rough beneath her fingers. But its message was clearer than any church bell. What is broken can still be held. What is burnt can still give warmth. Clara did not cry, but her eyes shone in the moonlight. She slipped the ring onto her finger. The world had tried to silence her, but this man had taught her that silence could also be strength, if it was chosen. And in that silence, she had finally begun to speak. The storm arrived without warning, as if it had a purpose. The sky was the bruised purple of an old wound, and the thunder was not a threat, but an ancient drumbeat, announcing a momentous event. The first pain seized Clara like an iron fist, sudden and undeniable. She only tightened her grip on the edge of a table, her nails digging into the rough wood. It was the only signal she gave. He did not falter. In the flickering lamplight, he moved like a dancer who knew every step in the small space. He boiled water, he arranged the bed, his hands working with a calm efficiency. An island of stillness in the storm that raged outside, and the one that was rising within her. The wind howled outside, as if the town itself were trying to unmake her, but Clara did not scream. She gritted her teeth, compressing every breath into a primal strength. And when the final sound tore from her lips, it was not the cry of pain, but the roar of creation. He was there, his hands steady, to catch the life she had clawed back from the world. A small being, red-faced and full of raw, furious life. Clara laughed, a broken, breathless sound of release. She pulled the child to her chest. "He looks like me," she whispered. The cowboy reached forward, brushing the back of his knuckles against the baby's cheek. For the first time, Clara saw a change at the corner of his mouth, a slight curve that broke through his usual severity. It was not quite a smile, but it was sunlight after the storm. "Will you name him?" she asked. He simply shook his head. She understood. This child would carry no man's past, no name of a father who had fled. "Then I will call him Joe," she whispered, "because the wind never breaks, even if the whole sky falls." When dawn came, the storm had passed. The air was clean and fresh, as if the world had been washed. Weeks later, she returned to the town square, not to challenge, not to seek validation. She only wanted a lemon drop from the general store. She refused to live like a fugitive in her own land. That night, as Joe slept, she looked at the man sitting by the fire and asked, "Do you think he will understand?" He didn't answer with words. He quietly took out his knife and a piece of wood. In his hands, the shape of a wild horse slowly emerged, imperfect but full of life. It was just like the one her father had carved for her on the night her mother died. He placed the small toy beside the sleeping child. Clara walked to his side, her heart finally quiet. "What you gave me," she said slowly, "was not a rescue. It was a place to return to." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw recognition. He took her hand. No vows were needed, no claims were made. There was only the steady pulse of their joined hands in the silence, a silence that was now vast, enough to build a home. As time passed, her story solidified into legend. They said her forge would sometimes glow on moonless nights. They said the man who walked beside her cast no shadow, that he was a spirit summoned by her pride. But those who had truly looked into her eyes, they knew the truth. They had seen a woman who was broken by the world, but who had mended herself, without anyone's permission. When Joe was a boy, he once asked his mother the name of the man who never spoke. Clara only smiled, her smile gentle by then. She stroked her son's hair and said, "A name is just a sound, Joe, but an act is a seed. You see for yourself which seed has grown here." Before her hands grew too tired to lift a hammer, Clara forged one final piece. Not a horseshoe, not a tool. Just a circle of iron, with no beginning and no end. She hung it over the door of the forge, a silent declaration of wholeness, a scar that had become a crest. She passed not in the sickbed, amid whispered regrets, but on the porch swing she loved, as the sunset stained the hills she no longer feared. Her son, a young man by then, sat nearby. And beside her, the silent man still sat, his hand resting on hers, a faithful sentinel to the very last breath. When they laid her in the earth, no preacher read from a holy book. There were only the townspeople, hats in their hands, uncertain of what to say. It was Joe who spoke, his voice clear and resonant in the quiet square. "My mother did not carry shame," he said to them all. "She carried sanctity." And he placed the worn metal ring, forged from a broken nail, into her palm. After that day, no one saw the silent man again. He did not leave in the night, nor did he say farewell. He simply walked toward the horizon and blended into it, as if his task was finally complete. But the forge still stood. The swing still moved gently in the wind, and the iron circle still hung over the door. Because Clara's legacy was not built with noise or with rage. It was forged in silence. The town had once heard the crack of a whip tearing through the air, but the loudest sound, the one that echoed still, was the weight of a steady presence, of someone who had held her without needing a single word to explain why she was worth it. And in the end, that was everything.